Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Usually it's just me and Dave talking about the beers, and then we'll get somebody coming in from a brewery to talk to us. You often say, Dave, that we're not experts. We just like beer and we talk about it. But we are now joined by two official experts, one in beer and one in wine. Welcome to the podcast, Jamie and Chris. Would you like to introduce yourselves and tell our listeners all about what you do?
My name's Chris Scott. I'm the wine guy. I've been in the wine trade for 25 years now. I run a wine education institute, if you like, where we train people up to be sommeliers and wine drinkers and just people who enjoy wine. You know, you don't have to do it if you want to go down that course, but we've been doing all sorts of stuff from wine appreciation through to the more formal training. And last year we teamed up with Jamie to offer the new WSET beer courses, level 1s and level 2s. They're sort of a new take on beer tasting, but it's more geared towards product knowledge than I would say brewer. If you were a brewer, you'd do a specialist course. But if you wanted to know lots about different styles of beers, how they're made and what to look for in those different styles of beers, then that's what the course is about, I think. And Jamie's had a long, illustrious career in beer. So when you tell us about that.
Thank you, Chris. So hi, I'm Jamie Percival. I am an accredited beer sommelier through the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. And I am very lucky to be a full-time drinks consultant specializing in beer, whether that be education, assessment, or procurement work. So I spend 5 days a week, sometimes longer, effectively assessing beer and teaching it. And my career spans back to about 22 years ago when I first started working in a pub based in Fulham called the White Horse on Parsons Green. For those that have heard that name before, its nickname is the Sloaney Pony. And I've sort of been on quite a long journey to get to where I am. But let's call me the beer geek / enthusiast that suddenly got a qualification and thought, can I take this a bit further? And that's effectively where I am today. A guy who truly loves his beer, wanted to know more, and now wants to educate more people the same way that I have.
I'm itching to open some beers and talk about them and find out stuff that we've never thought about before. But just before we do that, I've got a question. Is it a whole range of people that come to you to get qualified? Is it people in the industry? Is it just people who like beer and they want to find out more? What sort of people come your way?
You have quite a vast array of people that can actually come to the course. I mean, Chris has been doing it for over 20 years, so he's seen it from the wine side. I think what you're looking at is people who want to be further inspired by beer, feel more empowered when they're drinking beers at home, but also those that just want to further their knowledge or maybe even get a qualification to take them further down in their career. That could be hospitality or working on the brewing side, the trade side. So in the classroom, I have met people who work in finance who really just want to better understand beer and take their knowledge further. And then I've met cicerones and other very interested trade hospitality people who want to have a better understanding about beer so they can sell it better in their venues. And some of the real funds come from camera members that we've actually had in courses. And then we've also had just general consumers coming in. And the look on their face when they try some of the beers and they're given some of the knowledge as we start off is wonderful. Every time it's a wonderful. Imagine taking a friend who's never tried, for example, lambic, putting that under their nose. Just imagine the look on their face. They love it. They get very excited, but also a bit giddy because they don't know where the smell is coming from and how to understand that aroma. And as we explain it, it of course makes much more sense, but it's still so much fun every time you see a person exploring a beer for the first time, should we say.
The other thing to remember is the courses are, in the UK anyway, they're nationally accredited courses. So the level 2, WST level 2 in beer, which is probably most suitable for your listeners because you've got a highly engaged listenership based on what the podcasts I've heard from you guys. It's actually equivalent to a GCSE. So if you imagine you could do a GCSE in beer, how good is that? My daughter was 16 when she did her GCSE. So if anybody's thinking, I just need an extra GCSE module or unit, then the level 2 beer could be the answer for that.
Mean, the level 2 is 30 plus beers as well.
Yeah.
Over a 3-day course, typically. It's a lot of beers to go through with different styles. Yeah, it's very, very good fun.
I'm loving the sound of this.
When you say that amount of beers, so I guess, obviously, it sounds a really daft point, but like these beers are almost being treated like they would be on a wine course. You're not going to be drinking 10 cans a day, are you? They're going to be sampled out in much smaller measures and actually treated very differently, which is really interesting because it does feed into what beer wants to do when its craft is put on as a tag or artisan or whatever, because people have taken their time over it. It is meant to be enjoyed rather than just held down your neck type thing. So I guess that's what you're trying to bring out of it.
You've hit on a very, very good point. And this is something that really impressed me. When WSET were announced to take over and lead beer education in the UK and across the world, really, I was very excited. This was over 2 years ago. I signed up to become a tutor as soon as I could because they have what's called the SAT, which is a systematic approach to tasting. And that allows you to focus in on some very key points and link ingredients back into appearance, aroma, palate, and quality assessment. So when we actually go through an SAT in class, you are properly able to assess the beer based on all the knowledge you've just learnt and link it back to whether it's a malt-driven style, hop-driven style, yeast-driven style, or whether perhaps it might actually be more of a mixed fermentation, or maybe it's been stored slightly differently, so it's been aged in barrels, for example. And because the approach is so precise and consistent, you actually are able to better understand beer and walk away with a better way of translating it for yourself according to your own sensitivities and your own preferences. So the thing that I didn't, shall we say, love about beer before becoming a WSET tutor or doing the courses myself was that it was very subjective and didn't really have too many rules in the way that we talked about beer and tried to assess its quality. WSET has put the same rules for tasting into beer that it has for wine, spirits, and sake, and that has worked incredibly well because it's always about linking the ingredients and the knowledge you've just learnt from the course into understanding why those aromas exist and what characteristics you're actually experiencing on the finish. Of course, you've got to learn about off flavors as well. And I think one of the things that we might talk about as we go through is how often do you get a can that just doesn't taste right, or doesn't smell right, I should say. And it's most likely due to either oxidation or staling. Some of our favorite hazy IPAs that go out into the market these days, they go through a dry hopping process. And you guys have heard that before. You probably even know that it happens during or after fermentation, of course. But did you know that it's incredibly unstable in terms of the aroma? Now, unfortunately, if the aroma is incredibly unstable, it might start to dissipate and start to fade after about 3 months, especially if it's not been stored cold. So suddenly you get this aroma that's faded, effectively is staled, and it might even develop an off aroma that is oxidation, so wet cardboard or wet paper. That's quite common. Think about all those beers that sit on a shelf without any cooling. Could sit there for 3 to 6 months because they've got a year's shelf life on them. Now, that's apparently a beer that we should fall in love with, but we don't realize all the time that all those aromas have faded. It's not the beer that it was supposed to represent in the first place. So things like that, it, of course, really helps you to understand what you should experience in a first-class beer, really.
What I like about the systematic approach to tasting, and because I'm coming from wine, and I know it, I've used it for 20 years as from a wine point of view, is the students who use it, they suddenly have a mechanism to assess the wine, but also get an idea of the quality of the wine or beer. And they've got a structure, because often people who are enthusiastic about their drink, beer, wine, whatever, they drink it and they go, oh, I like this and I like this. And sometimes they lack the vocabulary to understand what the components are and how the components interact. And once you start identifying different components, you go through a rigorous structure of tasting, you can then see how different things interact, and it makes the whole much more meaningful to the person. Not only that, as Jamie was saying, by tying it back to the brewing process, you become easier to categorize things. I always think for me, when I'm doing wine, because I taste a lot of wines, strangely enough, I probably drink more beer than wine, but I taste a heck of a lot more wines. It's not about remembering every little detail about that wine or beer. It's about going, okay, this is a hazy IPA and they've used this type of hops in it and this type of thing. And then you've got this ballpark of this style. So what you're really remembering isn't all the details about that style. You're remembering where it's different from the style. And I think when you've used an SAT and you start using a rigorous, consistent approach to beer tasting, everything starts to fit together a lot easier than if you were just going out going, oh, I like this or I like this, and not really having the vocab or the framework to understand the product.
Big comment I'm so used to now, Chris, is, but it all just smells like beer to me. And by the end of the course, they start to actually go, that is a hop aroma, and it's definitely more tropical than I thought. It actually reminds me of like a pineapple, maybe even a tinned pineapple. It's just picking up on a few more extra bits of vocabulary and confidence at the same time. We need confidence when trying to talk about these with friends and fellow experts and things.
Right, let's open a beer.
Sounds good.
Which one's going first? You want to do Space Ghost?
Yeah, let's go that. So this is Space Ghost from Dark Revolution in Salisbury, hazy pale, 4.9%. Before I open it, is there anything I should do to it before I open it, or just open it and pour it out into the glass?
Open it and pour it out into the glass. The way we do it in the course is we pour straight into the middle of the glass to try and make sure that the foam actually rises. It actually helps to bring out more aroma and sort of helps to maintain the CO2 levels in the glass as well at the same time. We use ISO glasses when tasting, or wine glasses seems to be best. We'll have a look at the can and see what the can actually tells us. So you've already said kindly, obviously, a hazy IPA. And the things that I always try and take away is, okay, cereals including barley, wheat, and oats. Now, we know that wheat and oats could be unmalted or malted, and they contain higher levels of protein, leaving residual sugars that will make it hazy. And they might actually create not only a creamy and smooth mouthfeel on the beer, but oats also can make it have a fuller body and also slightly silky on the finish. Then at the top, you've got cold side and hot side. For those that never heard those terms used before in beer, I expect many of you have. Hot side is when hops are added on the hot side of the brewing process. So this is all pre-fermentation. So these are the hops that would typically be added at the beginning of the boil, the wort boiling stage, and that would be for adding bitterness. And then you'd also add some hops at the end of the boil, probably around flame out or just after, and that's hops that are added for aroma. Now, these are the most stable hop additions that you put in. And then you've got cold side, which we're using Talus and Galaxy. Talus and Galaxy are going to be purely to drive a high level of aroma. Those aromas could potentially be unstable, so you've got to try and chill these beers down and drink them as fresh as possible. But that's one thing definitely that's quite a key learning taking away over the years from drinking a dry hopped beer. If anything's added on the cold side, it definitely can change it. In terms of tasting, if you want me to, I can walk through a tasting example in terms of how we try and do it from a professional point of view.
Go for it.
Yeah, why not? Make sure that we swirl the glass to try and release more aroma. It's good to have a rounded bowl. And if you have an inward sloping glass, that means that the aromas are trapped straight up towards you. One bit of advice, if you fill it up to the top, the aromas are falling over the edge, go left, right, up and down and center. You're not getting all the aroma, so never fill your glass to the top. Unfortunately, you just lose over 80% of what you're trying to enjoy. Now, in terms of smelling, I've already spoken to Dave before the recording, but one of my favorite tricks is trying to remember how to neutralize your palate and also how to neutralize your nose. In terms of neutralizing your palate, you drink some water or a plain cracker. And in terms of trying to get your nose back to neutral, the best trick is actually just smelling your own skin, because your skin is the one thing in the world that you cannot smell. So you would literally just smell your arm and then off you go. Now that's going to reset your nose back to neutral.
I've got a mate who does that, but he actually smells his armpit, and I don't think it's neutral. I really don't.
I really want to see this now. I want him to come on the course and be like, no, not the armpits. That's too far. That's probably a stag do night or something.
I was going to ask you about this beer because there's a lot of information on this particular can from Dark Revolution.
Yeah.
If that information wasn't on the can, would you know that stuff without having seen it written down?
Okay, so haze in a beer is caused either by proteins and polyphenols combining together, and those proteins typically come from unmalted or malted grains such as wheat or oats. You can also get a haze caused by yeast, and you also get a haze caused by dry hopping. Now, the scale of that yeast usually indicates what ingredient has been used to cause the haze. So you can see this beer is really quite cloudy. You can't see through it. You would immediately say that this would probably be a beer that's been brewed using wheat or oats in order to provide a haze, and therefore you're expecting a fuller body as well. The other thing you can say looking at the appearance, if a beer is straw golden color, you're not expecting very hard-hitting malt aromas. You're probably looking at those low-level aromas like bread dough, light honey, some water cracker, but nothing that's had any heat applied to it. It's effectively very, very low level. And in a beer of this style, you wouldn't necessarily expect to have a hard-hitting malt aroma anyway. You have to go up to an American Pale Ale and a bit more into the IPA category to start looking at having some crystal malt or caramel used. When it comes to cold side and hot side hops, that's going to be putting your nose in. Now, you wouldn't necessarily define that a beer has had cold side dry hopping used in it just by being able to smell. Knowing that information tells you that that hop profile has been added, how it's been added, and that it should be a very pronounced aroma. That's probably the biggest takeaway. The last thing to add is that if you have a hazy IPA, they're typically low to medium in bitterness, whereas a lot of IPAs are medium to high. So you've got all this information before we've actually put our nose or our lips to the glass. You can effectively make all those assessments just by looking at the beer and drawing as much information just by appearance, effectively.
No, I was going to say, Dave, I think your question has been answered there rather impressively.
Pretty much. Fascinating.
I'm speaking for myself here. You weren't necessarily telling me anything I didn't know, But you were putting it, like you say, with this framework where I was like, oh, yeah, no, I do sort of know that. But when it's spelled out correctly like that, yeah, okay, it makes more sense.
A long, long time ago, back in 2014, 15, I took the beer sommelier exam and failed. And the exact reason why I failed was because I thought I knew a lot, but I had no framework to actually put that knowledge into place and extract it when I needed it. It was more like a haberdashery of knowledge that just sort of flew around. Occasionally I knew a lot about something, but I didn't often know a lot about everything. And I actually ended up reading 3 books to prepare for my second take on it in 2017 after doing some courses as well. And that properly prepared me because it provided the framework. And the interesting thing is that a lot of the things that I learned from those 3 books, they're all very, very obvious in the WSET course because it's all linked together, just obviously put into different sessions. It's the language, the scientific approach, the experimentation, the actual sort of testing things and ruling things out at the same time. So yeah, I've been where you are, and it's a lot more fun to be on this side where you have this really lovely framework to use. Should we go to having a smell? So everyone's obviously free to smell beers whatever way they like, but the one thing I will say is that the 3 ways we try and learn in the classroom, most people put their nose straight into the glass with a big long sniff. Other people prefer to actually try and do 3 short sniffs. This is my preferred method, the last one. Nearly all aromas have different volatility. So you get aromas that are at the top of the glass and aromas that are at the bottom, that are just heavier. So if you actually tilt your glass to 45 degrees and sniff from top to bottom in a big sniff, and then from bottom to top, you effectively find different levels of aroma. So you'll get these incredibly volatile, highly aromatic aromas coming out of the top of the glass. So you might think more along the lines of like a really nice orange juice, for example. While as something that's a little bit heavier, should we say like an earthy or a spicy aroma, that actually appears more down towards the bottom of the glass. Now, in this example, this beer seems to lend a lot more of the tropical and stone fruits, I would say. What are you guys getting in this glass? Because I can talk all day about what I'm experiencing, but I'd love to hear what everyone else has got.
Isn't it interesting? All of a sudden, me and you, Dave, would be sitting here saying, yeah, it tastes of this and it smells of this. But when you've got an expert in the room...
You don't want to say anything. Well, I've already ducked out halfway through the course here because I've been the naughty child, and I opened a different beer because I thought if we do one like in every way like this, it'd be great, but it would take a lot of time. What I've been secretly doing is drinking a different beer so I can try and pick up on what we're doing here and then feed back. So this one, I'm afraid, Dave, is on you to start with.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
I'm going to put pineapple into the arena.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And definitely some passion fruit in there as well. Like the passion fruit it's quite a delicate aroma. It actually comes out almost like it tingles on the nose. And then there's almost effectively like a creamier, fuller aroma down towards the bottom. It smells almost not milky, but it sort of smells almost like it's got more like a wheaty sort of aroma to it. It's almost like a malt aroma that's sort of just coming out slightly. But it's very, very subtle. The rest of the aromas, I love the fact that you've gone straight into pineapple. There's definitely like a light pink grapefruit in there at the same time. And you have to think grapefruit is like the grandfather of the citrus family. It can be quite woody, but you can also get pink grapefruit that's a lot lighter. You can also get a pithy grapefruit that actually comes through. I mean, at the top, I'm definitely getting a mandarin orange as well. So it's a much sort of lighter, sweeter orange.
I was thinking a little bit of gooseberry in there as well.
Yeah. So are you sort of picking up those things, Dave?
I am, but I'm going to, especially the orange, I'm going to play devil's advocate slightly and say to you that I could open any hazy pale and say exactly the same thing that you've just said about any hazy pale.
And this is, what was it that you guys used recently in an episode? You talked about hop fatigue and how people have effectively been using the same hops, producing the same beer. And I do have a conversation about craft beer to definitely talk about there, just in general over the last sort of 10, 15 years. What I would say is that different hops and different brewing processes and different yeasts will produce different results. I'll give you an example. You said pineapple. Now, can you tell me whether that is fresh pineapple or tinned pineapple?
Well, I'd go for fresh.
Precisely. Now, if you had overcooked these hops, shall we say, you've maybe applied too much heat to them, you might get a much more of a canned pineapple, tinned pineapple aroma. Okay. So that can be part of the difference when it comes to the brewing process. You could also get the fact that some brewers, unfortunately, don't have refrigeration for their hops, which means that the essential oils and the actual hop itself starts to brown and go stale. So the aromas produced from them, they're old and a bit musty. So the hop name on the side and the brewing process and the appearance of the beer might be very, very similar. But when we do classroom tasting, and I'm a beer judge as well, when you actually assess that liquid very objectively, just based on the qualities in front of you, you can really tell the difference between a beer that's been very well made and one that unfortunately has some imperfections or some quality issues, shall we say.
Just in the time, obviously, you've been doing this, I would say the gap in quality has narrowed heavily, and your good and very good is now far more available than your good and your average. I would say average has been weeded out quite a lot. I think it used to be a lot more hit and miss than it is now. I think the general quality has improved. Would you sort of agree with that?
Brewing knowledge, absolutely. That's the education piece. Brewing equipment, the way that we actually transport and look after hops has got a lot better. So they're actually go through refrigeration and they can now be freezed down using nitrogen. If you've tried cryo hops, for example, that was, I think, it started being used globally about 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. So the whole process of bringing beer to market has drastically improved. And with that, so has the customer expectation. I turn a question back to you. Back in 2004, the first beer that shook me was Goose IPA. Landed in the UK and I had it in bottle, and then I was lucky enough to have it in draft the year after. When was the last time you had a Goose IPA and went, that's amazing?
We had a Goose Island on one of their very first episodes. Do you remember?
We did actually, didn't we? Yes. And I don't think we were that bowled over by it, were we, if memory serves?
So that would have been nearly 5 years ago, and that's probably the last one I have had, and probably you as well, Dave. And we weren't, like we say, we weren't impressed then, and that was 5 years ago.
So this is the point I simply wanted to make. Once upon a time, those beers were created, and they were held up incredibly high by all those that were looking for just more flavour in beer. I'd also include Rooster's Yankee, one of the first American dry hopped beers that was available in cask and other forms here in the UK. Absolutely incredible beer. But people don't scream from the rooftops about Rooster's Yankee, unfortunately, anymore, as they don't scream about Goose IPA. We have got what you'd call hop fatigue. I love when you used it before. You've become so used to a certain expectation when it comes to a hop profile that you're almost bored of that particular profile. You demand more. And that's where the New England style and hazy IPAs have really come in. I mean, Chris, what did you think of the IPA that we've tried together and a New England IPA? Which one do you prefer?
New England.
The New England, because it's just less bitter and easier.
Yeah. I'm a bit soft on that. I'm what's called a super taster, so I have a particular sensitivity to bitterness, which is one of the things we do in the course, isn't it? Level 1.
We can talk about it in the course, level 1.
But everybody's got their own sensitivity to bitterness, and I'm quite sensitive to bitterness, so I can enjoy a nice proper bitter, but it's one of those things where it's nature and nurture. I'm genetically predisposition to have a sensitivity to it. But if I practice enough and put enough yards in, I can get over it and it becomes a nature nurture. So it's a nurture environment that you can get. But and I've done that with wine. I never used like big tannic red wines. Barolos were like, oh my God, I have to taste Barolo. And I've got used to that. And beers, I think, will be the same. I just need to taste a lot more bitter beers and I'll get used to it.
The Goose IPA is reasonably bitter. I think it's on the International Bittering Units. I'd have to go away and read this. It's probably around 50 or 60 IBUs, and the human palate can only really manage between 80 and 90. So we're already halfway there to our maxing out. Hazy IPAs are all about aroma and lowering bitterness. So you can see where the popularity switched to, I just want aroma, less bitterness, please. And even in the consumer-facing world that I get to, whether it be as an educator or other, people do talk about, I don't want the West Coast IPA anymore. No, thank you. I don't want any Westies, please. I'd stay away from that style if that's all right, because they just want something that's less bitter. Now, there are great West Coast IPAs that have got that lovely bitterness rounded off with a very well-balanced aroma and probably some malts, some residual sugars from malts, such as crystal malts, that actually, again, just take away a little bit of the bite from the bitterness, add a little bit of sweetness to the profile. That, again, just makes the beer a better all over well-balanced beer, a high-quality product. But the way that the profiles have changed from way back in 2004 to now, 21 years later, it was always going to happen. And there are so many people I know who have gone on the complete journey from lager drinker, bitter, American pale, IPA, Belgian triples, doubles, Gurzes, all the way back to lagers and bitters. I've hit the top spectrum, but actually the beauty of beer is in those 4 simple ingredients done at a very nice balanced level a lot of the time. How often do you get that? I mean, you're nodding your head there, Dave. Are you sort of agreeing with that in a way?
I'm agreeing 100%. With what you're saying about that beer journey thing as well, because Dave and I have just been talking about this. I think we have definitely gone through, and we still drink them, but are definitely past New England pales as beers. Like, I enjoy them. I know Dave does as well, but they don't excite us particularly. They've probably got there a bit quicker. You've always enjoyed sour beers more than I have, and I still don't particularly enjoy sour beers, but you're very heavily getting into your mixed fermentation, and with that sort of, I can see you starting to get into gozes and things like that in the next 18 months. I'm probably a little bit behind that, but we're just starting to go into that now and finding all that very interesting. I think that personally is 1 or 2 steps more closer to wine than it is beer almost. That's sort of where it feels like we're going a bit with what we really get a kick out of trying now.
I think the acidity is something that you get in those mixed fermentations, and you don't see a lot of it in normal beers. I remember when I was going, I'm going to do this course because I was one of Jamie's first students.
You're doing your New Year's story.
Yeah. And I thought what I'd do is, okay, I like wines that are fresh. So I'm going to get some mixed fermentation beers and I'm going to take them to New Year's Eve and run them past a group of mates. And I tell you what, I got to drink most of them because they're a style that it takes a while to get used to. And even with that freshness, I like freshness. They are hard beers to love, but some people do and they really get into it. The beer that surprised me is my wife did the level 2 course with us as well. She's not a beer drinker. Well, she wasn't a beer drinker, but she now classes herself as a beer drinker. The amount of beers she'll go, I'll have, what was it? The Kirk?
The Timmerman's Creek with black pepper.
Absolutely loves that because it's just a nice, easy, fruit-forward beer. But she was at the pub the other week having a wheat beer and all sorts of different styles of beer, which for her, she would have had a glass of rosé beforehand or a glass of wine. But now after the course, she's like getting stuck into all these different beers. She's actually starting to be more adventurous than I am.
I would definitely say Jane, she took away a lot of the knowledge and sort of felt more comfortable trying new beers. And that's what we want. People who suddenly feel they're either more informed or more empowered to actually go, I actually really like beers that have a traditional fruit added to it, such as raspberries, strawberries. I'd like to get one of those. It has some acidity, so it is very fresh. And if it's done in the right way, it could actually taste like a Bakewell tart, which was the tasting note we had on that. And it shocked everybody in the room. They were like, oh my God, it's a liquid Bakewell tart. That is so cool. Really was good though.
And that's probably coming back to that framework because Jane now has enough information to be able to go, I expect this. So she's more willing to give it a go. What's the next beer, Dave? I'll get it ready for you guys.
Nitro I'm familiar with as a style. Red Ale Nitro, never had one before. So I've been quietly drinking it and I'm trying to work out how to feel the pressure Dave had now about what to try and say about this. And No, you're fine. So my first instinct with it smells of very, very little. If anything, I get a watery smell. That's all I get. And then to taste, as the beer has sat in my glass a little bit and warmed up slightly, I've got the creaminess of the nitro. I have got a little bit now in the back end of the hops, and the hops used a Cascade Comet and I want to say Columbus. No, Magnum, sorry. Bittering hops. So there is a bit of bitterness and there's also a little bit of coffee and maybe a little bit of cream to go with it, but I'm guessing that's the nitro, and that's where I am with the beer as it stands.
Dave's told us what he thinks of the nitro. I'm interested to get your take on it now. The first thing Dave said was he couldn't get much on the aroma at all, could you? No,
I finished my can now and it didn't change. I sort of took on board the sniffing. I knew about the skin neutralising thing. I do forget to do it more than I should type thing, a bit like flossing, but each time just didn't really get anything on the nose.
It's an important thing to remember. Like, I used to be incredibly desensitized to a compound called diacetyl, which is like that butterscotch aroma that you get coming out from fermentation that needs to be removed from beer. It's acceptable in some styles. I've had to train myself a lot over the last 5 years to make sure that I can recognize it and get it at the correct perception. So is it at a low enough level that it's acceptable in the styles, such as a bitter or a Czech Pilsner is also accepted? Different sensitivities, different preferences. It all leads to us basically picking up aromas completely differently. What I will say is a nitro red ale, of course, the nitrogen is going to immediately add a textural component. It's going to make it a lot smoother and a lot creamier, especially creamy. So when we taste the beer, that's going to completely change our perception of it away from what we typically expect with CO2, which CO2 actually refreshes the palate and causes that rest. So you take a sip, you enjoy the beer, and then it causes a rest. So your palate is almost brought back to neutral again, or cleaned, if you will. Whereas with nitro, is expected to actually coat the palate and create that creaminess. What does it do to the aroma? It can calm the aroma down quite a lot. To get to a red ale, you have to use certain malt types. So you have to use malts that effectively have gone through a kilning process. And you're looking at those, probably dark roasted malts is lesser used. So you're looking more at crystal malt or cara malt and the potentially highly kiln malt. Aromas that are associated, highly kiln malt is like digestive biscuit. Crystal malt is like your candy floss, dried fruits, caramel. Dark roast is bringing in that coffee and chocolate. And you have a couple of lower levels, including brown, for example. So those are the things you would expect from a red ale. Whether they come out as being quite obvious and easy to smell, completely different. So let's have a look. It's not a bright red. It's quite a sort of a browny red.
Yeah.
So they've definitely used a little bit of darker malt in here as well at the same time. So that's more like a burnt bread aroma, rounded off with a little bit of caramel. And there's definitely some dried fruits in there at the same time, almost like a prune. So you can pick that.
When I first poured it out, I was getting quite a lot of fruit on the nose, and then that faded away very quickly. And I got some of that crystal and malty flavours, and that was the main profile. It's not like it's hoppy beer anyway, is it?
We talk about hops being the biggest flavour addition that you add to beers, but you can get beers that are flavoured via yeast and via malt, as we sort of said earlier, and you guys know very well. This is definitely a malt-driven style that has nitrogen added for a textural component. So did you get anything in the way of that burnt bread character?
I really didn't. And I wondered, like you were saying there, with the nitro sort of adding the taste over and dulling the aroma, whether it just completely dulls it for me, because as I say, I tried sniffing my glass a few times and whatnot, and it never changed for me. The beer was about taste and not anything on the nose.
Okay.
It's more texture, that's for sure, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't tasted it yet, but there's definitely going to be more texture in this. The prior knowledge of knowing what to look for prepares your brain for what you should be accepting. So I used to go in with a very, shall we say, clean slate and understanding that I'm going to smell the beer and basically whatever I smell is what I smell. But the problem is that is an incredibly wide spectrum of aromas to try and anticipate. So what I just did there by literally going, that's the colour, that's the style, these are the expected malts to be used. It's definitely a malts-driven style, unless it's an American red ale, in which case you would expect some big pine, resin, citrus, tropical or stone fruit aromas. A nitro style obviously is more about the texture and then obviously the aroma from the malts. I will say this, a lot of red ales over the years, in America, they started turning it into basically a softened down version of our bitters. It was almost like super malt. So they really just tasted very worty, very almost like soggy Weetabix or something like that. While as today, they're actually a lot better. They're using proper ingredients. And I will say Blue Monkey, as a brewery, are very well renowned for doing dark beers. So anything that they touch that uses speciality malts, I'm always keen to try. Gorilla Stout, for example, is one that I've tried recently. I think I had an Imp Stout. No, I had their barrel-aged barley wine %. It was a monster. Beautiful.
I've got a can of that in the fridge downstairs for you.
Yes, great. Let us know what you think.
Yeah,
so I'm just going to try this on the in terms of the texture. Wow. I mean, I don't know about you, Chris, on the texture and on the taste, on the palate, but that bready character definitely comes through along with the dried fruits, like that prune and the creaminess. It's not overly creamy in the same way that we get from like Guinness. Guinness is incredibly creamy with a touch of that coffee and roasted toasted characteristic. This has actually got a softer level of nitrogen. And if you look at how breweries actually add nitrogen, it's very specific. You can add it at lower and higher levels. It's not set an exact level, of course. And this is a lower level than what you get from Guinness, I would definitely say.
I got the burnt notes, the burnt bread, more on the nose than the mouth. It's there, but it's much more subtle.
It's definitely got the bready aroma, though, coming through on the retronasal on the back. It's quite a heavy aroma, so bottom of the glass and through the back of the throat, very, very easy. But yeah, that's using the SAT approach to try and analyze a beer based on appearance, then the nose, then the palate, and then we do what's called a quality assessment at the end.
Okay. I think I flunked that one slightly because I didn't get that at all. But I did find it really interesting. What I want to do now, and Dave, you'll be back to you going first for this because we've got two different beers again, but they've got the Creek ready. So if we try and apply the framework step by step and see if it changes what we get out of the beer. So if you go first, because the other beer I'm going to have is one I've actually had before, and I wasn't that impressed with it. So I'm very interested to see what I'm going to make of it, trying to apply a framework to it.
Before we move on to the Creek, I've got a question to ask. So we've noticed recently that red ales are getting more and more popular. More of your smaller breweries are making them. Is there a reason for why beer's styles suddenly become popular?
I don't have an informed answer to give you on that one, but I will try and give you my understanding of why styles like that would come back. Why are Burnt Mill, for example, producing a red double IPA? Why did they do that in the last 2 months? Have either of you tried it?
Yes, I have.
Can't remember the name of it, but it was very, very good. I think that it's kind of what we've already touched on a bit. First of all, hop fatigue, producing pale beers with massively pronounced hop aromas that unfortunately can be quite unstable and need to be drunk fresh and kept cold. There is a little bit of the word I want to use is sort of like people are not only getting a little bit sort of bored of picking the same thing again and again, but at the same time, the brewers are sort of getting a bit tired of having to produce the same beer again and again. So how do you take a hop-driven beer style and add a different dimension to it? Well, you would probably look at either changing the yeast or trying to change the grain bill, as it's called. So in the example of the red IPAs, people are starting to change the grain bill, which not only changes the body and texture of the beer, but also changes some of the aromas to favour those that are caused by specialty malts. Again, you're looking at digestive biscuits, toasted bread, nuts, again, that candy floss, dried fruit, caramel, all those aromas that are effectively brought to the front alongside probably pronounced aromas from American, New Zealand and Australian hops, for example. You also, on the yeast side, for example, I've always remembered that a beer that I tried called Flying Dog Raging Bitch, which was an 8.5% Belgian IPA. Dave D's smiling, so he's definitely tried it, I think.
No, I haven't actually, but what fascinates me is that people remember the exact names of beers and the exact ABV, and it always makes me smile because it just shows how passionate we are about this stuff, that we remember what to normal people is minute detail.
No, of course. And that's many, many beers tried. I'll never forget some of them, that's for sure. But that was a Belgian IPA heavily influenced by a Belgian yeast. So that yeast would have produced much more of an estery, fruity and phenolic spicy aroma on the finish of that beer to go alongside a very, very citrus and pine-driven aroma from the hops. And I remember it being slightly amber, so it would have used probably some crystal malt and highly kiln malt to add a little bit more of those malt profiles into the background. Now, that is a yeast taking the lead in changing an IPA style. It's been done quite a bit. People have certainly done it. I've sometimes brutalized the pronunciation of this, but anyone tried a Kivjak IPA, the Norwegian yeast? Wasn't that big for about 2 years?
Yep. And
it was everywhere.
It was.
And then suddenly we can't get them anymore. So trends definitely are going in and out. And I love the fact that a bigger grain bill is being used to produce these wonderfully delicious IPAs because it adds more body and character and actually takes them to another dimension. We speak in when it comes to wine and beer. Beers can be one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or even three-dimensional. And when you get to that third or even fourth dimension, you're really entering a place where they've got great levels of complexity. They're becoming more and more interesting to drink. Changing up your grain bill, but using the same hops that have been typically used maybe for the last 2 or 3 years, really adds that other dimension that makes it much more interesting. That's what I think is going on with the red style beers. Whether it be using traditional hops or American hops, it's bringing in another dimension. And it's also probably one of the most brutalized style for the last 50 years. Is mild going to come back next?
Hope so.
Great style, but sort of underappreciated as far as I think.
Right, let's get this next beer open, shall we?
Our Creek.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this.
It's worth saying, Dave, this is in your wheelhouse, isn't it?
Very much.
Fruit beer man.
Very much. So this is by Drop Project. It's a Cherry Creek. Just looking on the can here, fruit profile, sour cherry. Let's get it open.
Is that all that's on there?
Yeah, that's all it says, yes.
Okay.
I think it also talks about using wheat and maize.
Okay, yes.
And obviously adding cherry as part of the ingredients. So wheat is quite obvious. We discussed that. Maize is one of those adjuncts that gets used typically in beer because it's quite neutral, but it's also very good at being used as a second fermenting sugar. So you can use it to ferment and it's quite cheap to actually use at the same time. It does obviously create an aroma that can replicate quite corn characteristics, but you wouldn't expect that in this beer. As for the sourness, for those that don't know, obviously lactic acid bacteria is going to be the creator of our sourness in this beer. Typically would be done in what's called the kettle souring. So the lactic acid actually added from a cultured lab, given time to effectively turn the wort sour. You would then boil that wort, which would leave the sourness in the beer but kill off the bacteria before it goes to fermentation. And then they've obviously added some cherries. Most typically, you would add your cherries in the fermentation or maturation stage, maturation most typical, and they would have had to most likely filter the cherries out to make sure that A, the cans don't explode, which some people have definitely had before, and B, that you actually have a more stable, controlled product. So it's a low ABV, isn't it, this one? But it is, let's have a look at the colour. Wow, it's quite a pinky red.
Yeah.
Almost looks like the
side.
skin of a Bramling cross apple or something like that in terms of the appearance. How are you finding the nose, Dave D?
Just as I would expect it to be. That's a cop-out, isn't it?
It's not as fruity as I was expecting. I was expecting it to be a lot fruitier.
You've had much fruitier as well in the ones that we've tried. This is kind of, it's quite spritzy, sugary, like pear drop. It's a cherry drop. It's almost like a sort of calmed down cherry aroma. It's not like an intense dark cherry. It definitely has that sugary sort of spritzy profile on the aroma.
Yeah, I completely get that. And having smelt it, I'm thinking to myself, is this going to be one of these sour beers that actually isn't very sour?
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, the name of it is tarts. Maybe it'll have a sort of low-level tarty kick to it, but it won't actually necessarily have a mouth-puckering sourness. Like, I think one of the things that also can happen is if you do a Berliner Weiss, which is quite a clean, low-level acidity, you can actually pick up on the acidity quite easily. Once you bring in traditional fruits, such as cherries, it does change the sourness on the finished beer because you're not only adding a fruit, which is sweet, but you're also sort of adding other compounds to the beer. You might, for example, be actually adding another type of sourness, another type of bacteria that changes the profile of the beer, but unfortunately completely affects what you've created through the lactic acid, which has been controlled. So let's have a taste, because that's where the acidity is going to come from, and see what we think.
I've already tried it, and the acidity is superb. I mean, the way the acidity works is it's linear, but it's really, really nice. It's not too much like some of my New Year's Eve beers, whereas this is nice. This is what I want in a beer when I'm thinking about something fresh. I know you can have lager, and I like lager, don't get me wrong, a nice simple lager at the end of the day, but that's got that freshness I really like, and that's what I was looking for on that New Year's Eve, which I didn't have.
No, sure. So the intensity level's not too high on this, is it, Chris?
No.
It's probably about, out of 10, probably give us about a 4, something like that.
In terms of the acidity or in terms of the flavours?
Overall intensity.
But you do get that sort of, it has a nice citrus finish to it.
I know what you mean. I absolutely know what you mean. What about you, Dave D?
Definitely tart and sharp as opposed to sour for me.
Yeah, yeah. And that cherry aroma, it changes again, I would say, when we're actually having it on the palate. It's a little bit more, without the pastry element, it's a little bit more like cherry pie, almost like it's been baked a little bit, to be honest with you. So it's sort of calmed down a bit. It's lost the spritzy sugariness that actually comes through on the nose. So it's lighter and more vibrant on the nose. And then when you taste it and it's combined with the acidity created by the lactic acid, it's definitely sort of calmed that cherry profile down.
I almost want to have a spoonful of custard.
Well, there's definitely some beers that have tried to make their beers look like custard over the time.
Actually, I've got a question now. What do you make of breweries like, well, I'll name them. I'm thinking Vault City. What's your take on some of their sours?
Let's get the two opinions here. Subjectively, absolutely adore them. I think that level of experimentation, focusing in on just sour beers, means that you know exactly what's going to be delivered every single time. And dark beers, I should say. I had their Nitro Mars Stout last week. I think that they're delivering on enhanced flavor profiles through vast variety of brewing techniques in a very, very clever way. And they're one of the few that have actually really sort of doubled down on what they wanted to do and hit home run with it. What do I think objectively? Sometimes the beers will miss the mark for me in terms of balance and creating an overall sort of a very, very high quality product. Well, not loss in quality, actually. I'll take that back. It's more to do with that overall quality assessment. Does it have the complexity and the definition that we can really actually see where these aromas came from and understand how they're supposed to interact with each other? Sometimes they're a little bit overpowering or overbalanced or underbalanced. So from a very objective point of view, sometimes the beers are sensational, sometimes they're not quite there, but that can be true of any brewery, to be honest with you. But I am a fan of Vault City. I think that they take us to places that we haven't been before in the beer world, and long may it continue because it's very fun. It sort of means that every now and then you get to go, I've had my 3 hazy IPAs for the day. Let's get this. I don't even know where to start, like whether it be a raspberry custard beer or the blueberry bubblegum that I had last year, turned my tongue blue for like 3 hours, and the Nitro Mars Stout that I had last week. all sensationally different. What about you guys, though? What's your opinion on Vault City at the moment?
Dave will know. During lockdown, I absolutely loved Vault City. So this was the time they did this every Sunday. They put new releases out, and I bought every single release for probably 2 years, and I absolutely loved every single one of them. But for me, something changed when they stopped putting their beers into bottles and they went into cans. They lost a bit of their luster for me when that happened, and I've not followed them so closely. I sort of dip in and out of Vault City now. They've gone a little bit too wacky for me almost.
Do you like Wilderness?
Absolutely love Wilderness.
I thought they'd be up the street. They do cans, but a lot of their greater stuff is still in bottles. So
Yeah.
Perfect. I love what you guys said as well. There's so many breweries all over the place producing amazing beer. Some of them are very good at advertising it. Vault City's a very good example. Others less so. So you never really sort of see them come to the fray. What was the name of that lovely guy from Ohio that brews in North Wales?
Eric from Gapel. Yeah.
Those beers are very good. Very good.
I was quite interested. I might actually look them up and see if I can get an order in, because I'd love to try them. Just on the back of listening to your podcast, I was like, just another beer I've never discovered. It's just sort of, I'd love to sort of add them to the list of beers that I've tried and see if they could be a regular purchase for dinner parties and things like that back in London.
Yeah, they're certainly talking points, these beers. I definitely recommend you get some.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. So was that sour enough for you, or was it just right on the balance for you, Dave D?
It's not challenging to drink in any way. I could drink that very quickly. I probably would if you weren't here watching me. Yeah, I've still got some left. That would have gone down very quickly. It's not complex. We've talked about complex beers. It's not complex anyway. It's sort of quite one note, but it's a note that I really enjoy. It's fruity and very easy to drink, and it should be. What was it, 3.8, 3.9%?
I think it's a 3.8. I would definitely say this is a sort of 1 or 2 dimensional beer. It's not trying to throw you in a different direction or try and confuse you about what it is. But on a day like today, when it's between 23, 25 degrees Celsius, that ABV, that profile is absolutely perfect.
Refreshing.
It's just one of those things you can finish your day with and actually feel very refreshed. I would love it.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed there.
Which I think actually segues quite nicely into certainly the way they've described it on the can. They're trying to do a 3-dimensional beer here, I would say, which is Lilac Roller by Daya. Now, as I say, I've had this, and while we've been talking, I found, because I use Untapped, so I had a look at this one. I actually wrote a little bit more than I normally do. So it was my first experience of mega terps, which is what they talk about on the can. I actually remember this because I had to look up what mega terps was as a brewing technique or ingredient, because I'd never heard of it. And I then said, not sure. Main thing for me was musty, really musty hit when drinking. And then on the can, it says it's Vermont yeast plus freestyle megaterps make for a lush, bold dipper with loads of sticky lime, caramelized peach and breakfast OJ. So that's what they've said. And I said the orange just about gets through, but no lime, etc. Could be palate, but I don't understand this yet. So I felt like this was probably about as good a chance to see if I can understand this beer any better.
Okay, interesting.
What I'm fascinated to see now is when we get an expert's opinion and roundup of this beer, when you drink it, Dave, if you're going to get something different this time.
Well, I remembered the technique, poured into the middle of the glass to start. I'm quite happy with that. That's come out well. I'm going to neutralise myself first. Now, this is really fascinating, and it could be so many things. Is it that my other can wasn't as good? So the first thing I get, nose, orange juice. Am I predisposed because I've read the can and I've told, this is what really interests me. So it's not musty at all. And I remember this beer specifically because it smelt so musty, and it doesn't now. Now it smells fresh and it smells orangey. Don't get anything else yet. I'm not getting any lime or peach yet. Orange is very dominant for me.
You get lemon, lime and OJ. You might also get some gooseberry.
Am I just really suggestive? Because now you've said it, I'm sort of trying to pick it out, and there is something different there now. And now I know the beer that they do, which is lemon and lime, which is break me into bigger pieces, and that really does taste of that. That has that kind of citrusy, fresh lemon lime nose. I wouldn't say this does. I'm still sticking with orange as dominant. Perhaps maybe the gooseberry that you talked about, that's what I get as my secondary smell.
You've got a good can. I haven't.
This is really interesting. So I'm not drinking it now, but I have had this beer before as well. Me and Dave had it at more or less the same time. Not on the podcast, just we both bought a can and we had it.
No, you bought them both for us. You were in Daya's tap room. They came direct from there.
That's right. Yeah, I got them in Daya's tap room. I sent you one down, and I wasn't overly impressed with it either, funny enough. I can remember it failing to deliver on its promises. So you've got a bad can, Jamie. What's going on with yours then?
So technically we'd call this staling. I'm getting some OJ profile coming through right at the top of the glass, but it's quite dulled down. What I would say is like it's been cooked. You've heated it in a pan to the point that effectively the fresh OJ aroma's gone, and what you're left is like this quite dull, plain orange juice aromatic.
So Jamie, you've got what it sounds like what we experienced with our previous can of this.
And when I first put my nose in, I went, oh, that's musty. So it does happen.
When Dave was describing how it was, I was going, that's what I've got.
Yeah. Are you getting that as well?
Yeah. It does.
I mean, it's what I would call a very typical example of staling, or unfortunately something going wrong with the packaging, which they typically don't have from my experience. But the hop aromas have definitely faded. And I wouldn't be surprised if the hop bitterness, if there is much, has faded as well, to the point that what could have been a three-dimensional product has become very one-dimensional. And the word I'm going to steal from you, Dave B, it's just musty. And effectively, it doesn't actually have much of a developed aroma profile. It tastes, unfortunately, like a beer that's gone a bit old.
What shelf life do they give their beers now?
So 6 months.
6.
This was canned 25th of March.
Yeah. So 25th of March. So you're looking at within 3 months, and usually within 3 months, you would expect the beer to still maintain a lot of its freshness. You would say between 3 to 6 months is the best time to get hold of your beers. If they're kept cold, it helps to maintain it for longer. But it doesn't always mean that the hop aroma will stay the same throughout that time period. It will fade. It will dissipate. Look, I'm not going to point a finger at what potentially has happened here, but for example, if too much oxygen had got trapped in the top of the can, that oxygen gets absorbed by the beer, causes a staling effect, can start to develop that wet paper, wet cardboard aroma. I'm getting a light trace of that coming through in the beer, so I'm suggesting it's oxidized. That's caused the mustiness and the hop aromas to fade. But it's quite interesting to actually get a beer that I was hoping, like the others, to be right on point, so we could talk about it from that point of view. But to actually get a beer that I'm experiencing off flavors and be able to talk about them, just as good, happens in the classroom, got to go for it.
How many people get a beer, they'll go to a bottle shop, they'll take it home, open the beer, drink it and think, I don't like that.
And this is where, I'm not pointing any fingers here, Dave B, like the untapped world can unfortunately lead brewers astray. And without the information to hand about where those aromas would have come from, sometimes we end up saying things about a beer or about a brewery that could be scathing or harmful to their reputation, perhaps even to a small group of 10 friends. Those 10 friends tell someone else because negative news always travels quicker, and off you go. But I know Dare produce amazing beers, and I know that is not their shining beacon of a beer because unfortunately it's faded. But usually it's delicious. I mean, when I first got it, it was very fresh. It was 7 days in the can. So I tried it then. It was lovely.
So would you, now having had that, would you go to the brewery? Would you drop them a message and say, had this can last night, something not quite right with it? Would you do that? Would the brewery want to know that? I guess they would.
I can tell why these aromas are developed or faded. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm not saying that it's their fault. It could be part of the packaging process. It could also just be, unfortunately, the way that this one can has been packaged and aged. So I wouldn't necessarily report a case of oxidation or staling because that can happen, unfortunately, from one bottle or can to the next. It can also happen in keg and, of course, can happen in cask. Other aromas, if there was something acetic, you wouldn't necessarily get skunking in this because that's due to light strike. If they had like a strong aroma of acetaldehyde, big green apples coming out, or raw pumpkin or emulsion paint, that's brewing faults. Brewing faults I'd definitely report back to them and sort of say, just to let you guys know, I'd check your GAL number for this one. Not necessarily in this case, no. Do you guys report them?
It's an embarrassing subject, isn't it? Even if you're in a pub and you have a beer that is wrong, I think, we're not programmed to get that drink and take it to the bar and say, this is wrong. We might know it is, but I think we feel uncomfortable imparting that bad news back to, your man behind the bar or the brewer. But actually, they probably do really want to know about it.
The staling effect of the beer, it's very much similar to the wine world when we've got cork wines. The producer has put all this effort to make a really, really good product, and they've just randomly land up with a cork that's dodgy, that's imparted flavours into the wine, that's made the wine taste like damp cardboard. And the consumer doesn't know that the wine is no good. They just think that the wine or the beer with staling is just faulty. It's just not for them. And it just creates terrible, terrible problems. It's one of the reasons why New Zealand went to screw caps, because the wines taste better under screw cap for that style of wine. And it reduced all those anxieties about cork fault problems. Used to be 1 in 20 bottles of wine would have a cork taint problem. And it's much lower now. I've seen quite a few beers now with staling now that I'm starting to get a feel for what it means. And it's a lot more prevalent, I think, in beer than the old cork tainters.
Yeah, it's not just staling as well. Not just staling. I mean, I always remember when we switched from corks to screw caps in the pub when I was working in Fulham. And the story I was just thinking of a second ago is one of my roles is, do you guys know what cask mark is?
You see the logo, don't you?
Yeah. So effectively, it's the independent organisation that goes out and reviews quality of beer in pubs, whether it be in cask or in keg. And in one of my local pubs, I went and had a pint of Sandbrook's Wandle, because that's the brewery literally around the corner from me. And I'm a cask mark assessor, and this was a cask mark pub. And the beer was acetic, completely gone. It was not completely obvious, but it was there. So, of course, I just gently went over and said, I'm really, really sorry. I think the beer's finished. It started to go acetic. And the manager took it back to the chef, who smelt it, swigged it, smiled and went, no, that's fine. I said, okay, can we swap it for something else? And they went, no, the beer's fine. I was like, okay, we'll go. Sorry. So I ended up leaving. And that misinformation, where in the trade, unfortunately, they don't know what a bad beer smells or tastes like, that's very unfortunate and can lead to customers walking out the door. And here's another one. Do you guys ever try, and you as well, Chris, a single hop mosaic beer?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you ever get onion and garlic?
Sort of. In that there was a beer recently which did feature mosaic, which we only had last week, Dave, and I said about it being savoury, but that was the brewer's intention, and we enjoyed it.
So a lot of people immediately perceive that as an off flavour. So they go, oh, it smells like onion, that's wrong. But that is an expected aroma that you can get from mosaic. Dark berries and savoury aromas, such as onion and garlic. So some people are more sensitive to it than others. So both of you could have tried the beer from exactly the same bottle in exactly the same can or whatever, but experienced it in completely different ways. But yeah, people experience things, aromas like that at completely different levels. And it's interesting because what is one person's absolute premium best can or beer that they've ever tried is another person's absolute failing, the worst thing, and needs to be drain poured, unfortunately.
It's a bit like, people like different drinks. Partly it's, we talked about bitterness and people being sensitive to bitterness, but we all have different threshold levels for smells. And sometimes you'll get a smell that you really, really like and the other person can't smell it. Well, it's not in their threshold. That cork taint we were talking about earlier is a classic one where some people can get cork taint in a wine, but other people can't get it, and the wine tastes just absolutely fine to them. And you get that with every aroma in a beer as well, whether it be from hops or from malts or whatever. It's everybody has a different threshold. So no two people are ever going to taste the same beer the same.
Well, I think overriding for me of this, obviously I'm not pleased for Dea, who I really enjoy as a brewery overall, that this one has not quite worked out. But at the same time, I'm quite pleased for myself that I was right in that what I got wasn't my palate being completely deficient. Because actually, funnily enough, this can has done exactly the same. I know I said I got a bright orange nose to start with. That's quickly dissipated, and now I've not got any. I've gone back to what I had before, which was this sort of musty, and there's almost a slight chemical taste to it now as well. So it's just, it's not worked. That's fine.
There is also the illusion, Dave. I once convinced 9 people in a room that there was a salt profile in a beer just by telling them. This beer is salty. Can anyone else taste salt? There's that lovely underlying salt profile in the beer. Can you get it? It's even on the nose. If you smell it really hard, you'll pick up the salt. 9 people in the room went, yeah, that's salty. And the other person went, no, it's not. And I went, well, you're the one that's right. Yeah. Like, if you want to smell something, you'll probably go and find it sometimes. And that's lovely flavour memory playing tricks on us sometimes. You love Dea, so you want everything to smell brilliant. So you remember some of their beers from before, and it all gets caught up in the glass.
Yeah.
That's where objective, analytical tasting really sort of comes in. It really makes us much more powerful when it comes to trying our beers. You find things that you truly love.
The other thing that's quite interesting is a lot of research by a guy in Oxford, Professor Charles Spence, and he's done a lot of work looking at how music or even sounds will change your perception of a product. And I had a mate of mine, or an employee years ago, who used to work in a lot of pubs, and this probably a little bit dodgy, but how they used to choose the rhythm of the music to increase the rate of consumption and things like that. So it changes not only how the product tastes, but also how fast you drink it. So the environment is huge.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit on one of our things. Like, we have a section called Tried and Tested where it will be a beer that we've enjoyed most since we last did an episode. And there's been occasions where the beer will not be like, it was not the best beer that we might have had in that period by a long stretch, but the environment where we were or what was happening at the time just made it all the much better. So that kind of thing definitely plays a part. The other thing I just wanted to say, we were talking there about the preconceptions and stuff, because I said, I thought, oh, am I just getting influenced here and I feel I should be smelling this? That Daya beer has a rating, and Untapped is a very binary system in a way and doesn't quite work, but it has a rating of over 4. And I wonder how much of that is people who, like you say, love Daya and can't believe that they could possibly put out something that hasn't quite hit the mark. So it still goes up in there. Like it gets a little extra bit added on because, oh, look, it's fine. I think it tasted about just about, so it's there. Whereas, as you say, if you're doing it analytically, this one did fall short, but you don't want to be...
The other thing would be how many of those tastings were from keg or cask. That wouldn't have affected it in the same way for oxidation. The thing that would happen in keg is if it's exposed to CO2 for too long under pressure, the CO2 dissolves back in, adding more carbonic acid, effectively changing the overall profile of the beer. Takes about probably 7 days under high pressure, I think. Yeah, can start to make changes and effectively change your experience or enjoyment of that beer, unfortunately.
When you're talking about enjoying a product, they did experiments. This is with wine again. Sorry, I'm a wine geek, not a beer geek, but it's relevant for beer. They put people into a functional MMR scanner so they could see how their brain lit up in real time. And they gave them some wine and said, here, taste this wine. It's a £5 bottle of wine. They looked at the brain waves. And then they gave them another wine and they said, this is a £1,000 bottle of wine. And their brain lit up. They really enjoyed the wine. The problem was it was exactly the same wine in both instances, but they physically enjoyed the wine that they thought was more expensive because they thought it was more expensive, and their brain lit up and their pleasure senses were all over it. So that comes to what you're saying, Dave, about if you want to enjoy it, if you think that brand has got a really strong quality aspect to it, you're going to enjoy it more anyway.
I'm pleased it's sort of reinforced a few things that you and I have probably picked up along the way, Dave. As you said at the start, we're not experts, but I think we've probably just about come out of this with our reputations intact.
Of course. This is all about us sharing knowledge and stuff, isn't it?
You've touched on it there, sharing knowledge. I've got a question for you. Do you ever go into a pub or a tap room or whatever and just want to have a beer and drink it, but you find yourself analysing every beer you have? Can you ever get away from that analysing bit? Can you just drink it and say, yeah, this is nice?
Yeah, my wife insisted that I turn it off every now and then. Quite literally, I turn it off, I turn it on. It's one of those very easy things to do these days. I used to not be able to. I just overanalyze everything. So it switched on, obviously, when we're trying the beers today. But last night I was sat back. What did I have? It was an easy, hazy IPA that I just wanted to test out that had been sat in the fridge for about 2 weeks. And I just switched off and drank it. I didn't even think about it. I can't even remember the name of it right now. I will in a sec. But it was just one of those where I'm just drinking for refreshment to enjoy without actually trying to overthink what I'm having. There was another beer that I did drink, and it was a sour. Oh, I don't want to name the brewery, but I remember it. I'll say it was a cherry and peach sour. You won't be able to figure out which brewery it was from that. Came out in the last 3 months, and I tried it and went, you have failed miserably. This is getting down the drain. So that was me analysing it and going, this is so off balance. The cherry wasn't there. There was no tart. It was more like this very, very old, dull peach with very minimal sourness. So there was no refreshment or enjoyment to it. And I was just like, this is awful. I've got to get rid of this and get something else. I do remember that very particularly. But it's nice. The problem is that if anyone asks me at a dinner table, what do you do for a living? 2 hours later, we're trying to leave and I'm still telling them about beer. So that's my problem, probably. I get too wrapped up in, well, actually, I get asked too many questions about it, is the honest truth.
It's easy to see why, though, because I think, we've been talking in an hour and a half and it does feel like we've barely scratched the surface. Could easily go double again and keep thinking of different things to talk about and get answers on, because it is fascinating to see what we do in a way, Dave, I would say, but sort of dialed up to 11, isn't it? We talk about beer on our level, but this is a sort of it taken up several notches and really broken down.
Everybody can be there. That's what I got to say on it, though. Everybody. We all have our own palates. We have to learn how to use them. And I tell you what, I'll give you 3 books that any user, any listener can pick up and go on the same journey I did. At the end, you end up doing courses, which, of course, we offer those courses, but the 3 books that get you started. I really wanted to understand how my system works. How does the nose, how does the palate work? Taste What You're Missing by Barb Stuckey, a food scientist based in America. It's one of the best books I've ever read that is just generally available, not overly technical, gives you experiments, and really allows you to understand more how your olfactory system works, how your taste receptors work, some urban myths, and just sort of breaking down how to use your system to translate tastes and aromas and the overall picture of flavor. Secondly, you want to know about ingredients? Miracle Brew by Pete Brown. Romantic story telling all about the 4 ingredients of water, yeast, malt, and hops. Makes you fall in love with them and makes you understand them better. And lastly, Beer Pairing by Julia Hertz and Gwen Connolly. It's the best beer pairing book out there that not only brings anecdotes and stories, but the science and experiments all into one book. Definitely the most classical book to pick up and really open up more understanding about how beer is paired in with food, whilst getting you actually do some very simple experiments at the same time. But after that, you're going to want to get a qualification, and that's where WSET is very, very useful, because you get to do tastings with people like me who can actually take what the knowledge you've just taken on and apply it and get more confident with it. That's what I had to do. Thing is, I went all the way to becoming a full-time drinks consultant, so I'm in it now and I'm never getting out. Some people just want to have it with more information and a little bit more understanding, and that's where we meet most of our students as they come into the classroom. Or maybe you want to end up being a beer sommelier and trying to get into the drinks trade and down the level. We talk to all types, and it's fun to hear the experience levels, and everyone shares in the classroom as well.
I think we need to get these books, Dave.
I'm really interested in that. I'm hoping they're on Kindle, because then I'll just go upstairs before bed and just start dissecting them. You know, all this, as you well know, massively appeals to Jamie said it there, like overanalyze everything. You know, what do I do? 90%. My job is overanalyzing everything. So it completely appeals to me.
I want to get these books. I think we should both do it, both read them. We can talk about our journey on the podcast as well, reading these books and what we're learning. We'll then see if we want to do the course when we get to the end of it. If there are people out there, Jamie, who do want to do the course and get in touch with you, how can they do that?
So you want to speak to Chris about this because you want to visit the 3050 website, don't you?
3050.co.uk or 30.com, depending on where you are. You can do the course either with us in person, but there's not that many people running the WSET beer courses in the UK. I think there's about 4 or 5 providers. But what we do is we run it as a mixture of in-person and online. So we run it as a hybrid course. There may not be a provider nearby for you, but if you wanted to and you did it with us, we would ship you all the beers, all 30 beers for the level 2. And you would have all the beers, you'd dial in, just like we're doing here with Jamie, tutoring you, tasting the same beers he's tasting, all that type of thing. And then you do the exam remotely through a remote invigilation, so you actually don't need to travel. You can do it in your pajamas.
Chris is being modest as well.
Although, to be fair, you do start about 9:30 in the morning drinking beer, so it can be a tough morning.
Chris is being modest. He's set up quite a unique system, which is always 2 cameras with 3 microphones. So effectively, it's incredibly interactive for everybody online. So you're always involved. You're always getting involved in the questions, tasting the beers, giving your opinions. I've never seen anything set up that way. Yeah. So when I got to see the equipment and how it was done, I knew this was going to be the best choice for me as well, because I could teach anywhere now. Plus, you get a full can instead of samples.
That's true.
Which everybody seems to enjoy. I certainly wouldn't mind that.
I don't know about you, Dave. That has been
eye-opening, I think is the word as well. There's a lot to take in a short amount of time, I think. There were some certain things coming through there where I'm going to just take away and start applying to beer. And as Dave says, we'll get those books and start our journeys on that as well and just see where we end up. But no, it's really interesting to see that this is out there now and increasingly, hopefully, becoming more and more prevalent.
I think the other thing is, as I was saying with Jane, is that my wife wasn't a beer drinker, but by going through the course, she would now class herself as a beer drinker.
Yeah.
And she's quite, compared to what most beer drinkers like, she's actually quite an adventurous beer drinker now as well, which is fantastic.
One of the things, just a sort of teaser for the Taste What You're Missing book to get everyone started. I'm assuming you guys have tried Ben & Jerry's ice cream at some point in your life. Great. Do you know the story of how Ben & Jerry's was created? So one of the things that I found interesting was to try and explain how texture plays such a key role in the Taste What You're Missing book. They bring up the Ben & Jerry's story, which is the fact that when Ben and Jerry were going out to create ice cream, they were sampling things like chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, trying to see what type of ice cream they should create. But the one thing that was different is that Ben suffers from anosmia, so has no sense of smell. So when he was trying the ice cream, he was not experiencing chocolate or vanilla or strawberry. He was experiencing frozen water. So what they decided to do was start adding other crunchier elements into the ice cream to give it more texture, therefore making the ice cream more interesting for Ben, whilst also being interesting still for Jerry. That is how I always sort of remember trying to think back to everything that I eat and drink, including beer. How has the texture played a part in terms of my overall enjoyment, and where is that texture coming from? Because it took a guy who suffered from anosmia to completely reframe how ice cream was being delivered in the US and across the world. And if you apply it back into beer, texture plays an incredibly key role when it comes to understanding how that can influence your satisfaction of it. Look at the Space Ghost that we tried. It was very satisfying in terms of its mouthfeel. It didn't taste thin or pithy or light. It was well-rounded, had a slight creamy edge to it. It had a fuller body. But that's a pale ale with a big pronounced aroma. So by cleverly using the right grain bill, they've actually created a beer that not only has a very enticing aroma, but also has a very satisfying texture to it at the same time. So I always try and think of texture whenever I'm trying beer, and I always think of the Ben and Jerry's story. And that was part of the Taste What You're Missing book.
I want to get myself on Amazon now and order these books.
Yeah, I'll have a look. I'll be doing that just before I go to bed.
This is Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast. Daftaboutcraft, you're tuned it to your favorite beer podcast.